What would you do if you were out in the middle of nowhere and you were being hunted by something or someone, and your only source of safety, your only way out of that situation was your truck, but it was located a mile away? Would you stay in the relative temporary safety of the location you were in, or would you take the fight to whoever or whatever was hunting you? That is something that William never thought he would have to ask himself. But before we get into his encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you would like to have shared on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And the next time you go pulling up to wherever you're going hunting and something just feels off, reach over, grab that subscribe button, pull it back into your truck so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Early one Saturday morning in October of 2009, William was fast asleep when suddenly he was awoken by the sound of his alarm clock going off. Instead of reaching over, hitting that snooze button like he would every other morning, he looked at the alarm clock, saw that it was 2:30 in the morning. He instantly sat up, just completely excited and just feeling absolutely pumped for what this day would bring. He had been working all week, and it was finally Saturday, which meant one thing: he would be able to go out to his favorite hunting location and go after the buck that he had had his eyes set on for the past couple of months on his trail cams. So William reached over, turned off his alarm clock, got up out of bed, and then went about his morning routine. After having a fast shower, a quick breakfast, he threw on his camo, he grabbed his bow, he grabbed his pack, and then he made his way out to his truck in the garage, loaded it up, and then he made the hour and 45-minute drive from his home in Minneapolis northeast to where he would be hunting. It was a property he had hunted for many years. He was very familiar with this property. But on this particular season, he was after this one buck that he called Delta Tango. And he named it Delta Tango because this buck had a double drop tine. If you don't know what a drop tine is, it's a tine that sticks off the main beam of a buck and normally stick down, maybe slightly out to the side. It's kind of a rare thing, especially to come across a double drop tine buck. So William was very pumped that he had this buck on camera, and this buck was the one that he had his heart set on getting this season. So he was looking really forward to today's hunt. After driving for about an hour and 40 minutes, he spotted an intersection up ahead. He recognized this intersection. This is where he would be turning to head up to the hunting property. So as he approached the intersection, he slowed down, he made a left-hand turn, pulled off the paved highway onto a country gravel road, and drove down this road for about a mile and a half to where this road made a gentle turn to the right. He made his way around that turn, then he drove for another half a mile till the road just pretty much ended at this little pit. Once he got to the pit, he drove his truck down into it, pulled up on the other side, and instantly on his right hand side in his headlights he could see the absolute dense woods, and on the left he could see that it opened up. There was a nice big alfalfa field along with a bush line about 150 yards away. He slightly turned his truck to the left, looking out into this alfalfa field. He sat there for a few seconds just looking, trying to see if he could see any sign of deer at all. And right as he went to turn his truck off, something caught the corner of his eye up along the bush line, right along that real dense chunk of bush. He turned, looked in that direction, and about 20 feet up in this tree, he saw these two yellowy white orbs that looked a lot like eye shine, but they were pretty high up the tree and they were fairly far spread out. His first thought was maybe this was a raccoon, maybe it was an owl. But he sat there looking at it and he just kept thinking, like, those eyes just look too far apart to be a raccoon or to be an owl. But he really didn't think a whole lot of it. He turned his truck off, got out, grabbed his stuff, and as he was loading his pack onto his back, he noticed that the area just felt very off. It felt really silent. He did not hear the usual sounds he would hear. But again, he just brushed it off, figured, you know what, I'm just spooking myself out, everything's going to be fine. So he grabbed his bow, and then he started following this fence line along the edge of that alfalfa field and that real thick bush. So as he made his way along the fence, he had the thick bush on his right, the alfalfa on his left, and he was walking pretty slow, really listening to see if he could hear any sounds whatsoever. trying to pay particular attention to if he spooked any deer up in the process of walking in. When he got to the spot where he had seen those eyes, seen those orbs up in the tree, he pulled out his flashlight, shone it up into the trees, trying to see if he could figure out what that was that he had seen. After about a minute of not seeing anything and not hearing anything, he continued along that fence line for about another 80 yards until he got to where the bush line started at the edge of that alfalfa field. From there, that fence line would continue for about 3/4 of a mile. It really narrowed out. So he made his way along the fence line, going through some really overgrown grass, overgrown willows, walking very quietly, trying to pay attention if he was spooking anything, and trying just basically to listen to everything around him. After walking for about 3/4 of a mile, he got to another fence line that ran to his left, and that's where he would be hunting. Down that fence line, about another 350 yards, it came to a dry creek bed, and that's where he was going to be setting up his saddle. So he made his way down that fence line, got to that dry creek bed, found a tree that he always set his saddle system up in, and then he got into the process of setting up his saddle for the morning's hunt. By the time he was fully set up, it was about an hour and 15 minutes before legal, so it was still full on dark at this time. He's up in the tree, he's leaning back in his saddle, his bow's hanging up on the other tree, and he's listening to everything going on around him. And that's when he realized that there was nothing going on around him. He heard nothing at all. He heard no small animals running through the underbrush. He heard no coyotes off in the distance. And that was really strange for William. He had never experienced that on this property. But he knew, because of growing up hunting, spending a lot of time out in the great outdoors, that was normally a tall tale sign of a predator being in the area. So he was feeling a little bit nervous, but he thought, you know what, I'm 20 feet up a tree, I'm in my saddle, I have my bow. Even if there's a bear or another predator in the area, I'm going to be completely fine. I'm just going to stay here, keep listening to see if I can figure out what's in the area that could be causing the silence. After a few minutes, he heard something coming up behind him slightly to his right, so he turned to look to see if he could see what this was. But the canopy was way too thick, and it was still way too dark for him to see anything at all. But still, he kept looking, trying to spot any movement at all to try to identify what this was. As it got closer, it got to about 20 yards behind the tree he was in. He heard whatever it was branch off, and all of a sudden he realized that, hey, this is not just one thing, there's actually two of them. So his first thought was, okay, this was most likely a doe with a fawn, but this is really weird that one of them's going one way and the other one's going the other way. See, typically if there's a fawn following a doe and they come to a cut line or a small clearing, typically they'll be together kind of in a straight line. They won't branch off and head out at different parts. So typically the fawns, especially that time of year, will tend to stick fairly close to their mom, to the doe. So William was thinking that this was a little weird. As he sat in the tree listening, he could hear the one moving, and all of a sudden it stopped about 15-20 yards away from him, up in this real thick part where there was this big pine tree, and he could hear that the one on his left sounded like it was about 25 yards away, and it stopped right by another pine tree. At this point, William's like, hey, what the hell is going on? What are these? This is not typical deer behavior. These are definitely not deer. So at this point, he was starting to think, okay, well, maybe these are coyotes, maybe it's a wolf or something, but he really had no idea what these things were. As he's trying to process everything that's going on, he realizes that those two things under the trees now sound like they're climbing up those trees. At this point, William's like, okay, this is definitely not deer, this is definitely not coyotes, it's definitely not a wolf. The only other thing that this could be would be a bear, but this is not normal bear behavior either. Like, if this was a mom and a cub, why did they split up? Why are they not together? And he was trying to figure out, based on his knowledge of all the different animals he had grown up around, all the different animals he had grown up hunting, and really it just made absolutely no sense to him. So as he's standing in his saddle, listening to these things climb up the tree, he just ends up saying, what the hell? As soon as he said that, all of a sudden those things stopped moving, and the area again just went absolutely deathly silent. At this point, William's up in the tree, and now he's kind of freaked out because whatever these things are climbing, they heard him speak, and now they've just completely stopped. So he did not know what to do at this exact moment in time, and his first reaction was to grab his bow just in case. So he reached over, grabbed his bow, put his release onto his D-ring, kind of leaned back a little bit in the saddle so he would be able to draw and take a shot if need be. And he just stood there for about another 2 minutes. After about 2 minutes, he could hear whatever it was in the tree over to his right sounded like it jumped from that pine tree up against this other tree. It just sounded like he could hear it push off the pine tree. You could hear pine cones falling down to the ground. He could hear almost the sound of wind from this thing moving through the air, and then he hears it slam up against the other tree. At this point now, his heart's just racing, and he's freaking out because he's like, holy crap, what can jump from one tree to another like that? Because he knew exactly which two trees these were. And those trees were not that close together. They were probably about 8-9 yards apart. So that's a pretty big jump, especially if it was a bear. Bears will sometimes go from one tree over to another, but to jump 9 yards like that, that's basically completely unheard of for William, for a bear to be able to do this. So standing in the tree, heart racing, he's just peering into the darkness, trying to really figure out what's in front of him, completely forgetting about whatever that was over behind him to his left at this point, and he's looking into the darkness, into this pine. All of a sudden, from in those pines, he saw that same yellowish white eye shine, those same orbs that he had seen when he pulled up at the property, looking directly at him. At this point, William quickly tucked himself in behind the tree he was in to try to stay out of this thing's line of sight, when all of a sudden, the one that was behind him to the left, it sounded like it just jumped out of the tree it was in into another one. At this point, William's heart was racing, and he was just absolutely terrified, and he thought for sure he was going to be done for, that it was just a matter of time before whatever these things were on top of him. So he slowly released his release from the D-ring of his bow. He took a deep breath, he closed his eyes, reached down, grabbed his knife. Now he's standing on his platform of his saddle system, bow in one hand, his knife in the other, basically just waiting to be attacked by whatever these things were. After about a minute of realizing he's still in the tree, these things haven't attacked him yet, he decides he's going to slowly peek around the tree again to see if he could see if this thing is still there and try to figure out what it is. So very slowly he looks around the tree towards where he had seen that eye shine, and he notices that up on the branch of this one tree, he sees what looks almost like a person, but not quite a person at the same time. Or if it is a person, this person just can bend and move their body in a way that just did not seem natural. William can only really see like a very faint silhouette of this thing on the branch, and it just looked very emaciated, like a very emaciated person, but it moved very cat-like, just the way that it moved along this branch, kind of the way a cat can move with its legs kind of in a straight line. That's what this thing was doing along that tree branch. It reminded him a lot of like what Gollum from Lord of the Rings is like, just a very emaciated person that just moves very unnatural and very weird. As he's staring at this thing, he realizes whatever it is, it's not looking at him right now. He does not see that eye shine, does not see those orbs. So he just kept staring directly at it in absolute horror of what he was looking at. After about 30 seconds, he heard from further down the cut the all too familiar sound of a white-tailed deer's alert blow. As soon as that deer blew, he heard those two things almost at the exact same time. Sounded like they said "what the hell," but in his voice. He said it sounded exactly like his own voice. As soon as he heard that, he watched that one in front of him quickly slink down this tree. He heard the one behind him. It sounded like it did the same thing. And these two things went running down that cut. He could hear sticks breaking. He could hear the leaves moving. And after about 30 seconds from down the way that he heard that deer's alert blow, he heard this absolute blood-curdling shriek. He said he had never heard anything like this before. Describes it almost as sounding sort of demonic, just a real high-pitched, like, loud shriek. And in that moment, he knew whatever those things were, they had just got that deer. At this point, he made a very quick split-second decision of should he stay or should he take advantage of the fact that whatever these things are, they have now taken down a deer. They're going to be occupied with that, and he should use that opportunity to try getting back to his truck. He chose to head back to his truck, so he quickly just climbed down the tree. He left everything up in the tree still. He just had his bow, he had his knife, and that was it. He left his pack, he left his saddle, and then he started running as fast as he could back down that cut. As he ran down this cut, he was really trying to run as quietly as possible. He did not want to risk stepping on a log, making a bunch of noise, and alerting these things. So he was really trying to pay attention to where he put his feet, even though he was trying to run and get out of there as quickly as possible. Periodically, as he would go down that fence line, he would hear those things shriek from back in the direction where they had got that deer. When he got to that alfalfa field, he pretty much gave up, not making any noise, and he just sprinted as fast as he could right back to the truck. When he got to the truck, he opened the door, jumped in, started it up, and as soon as he started it up, he looked out his windshield across that alfalfa field, and he saw 4 of those yellowish white orbs looking directly at him. At this point, he put the truck in reverse, backed out of that pit, hit the gravel road, and floored it all the way home. William has not been back to that property ever since. He told his buddy about what had happened. His buddy went back, got his stuff, but William refuses to go back there even to this day. Well, that's it for today's encounter. As always, guys, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd really like to know what you think these things were. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.